Hey, how's it going everybody? It's DJ Sketch and welcome back to the channel. If you've been following this channel for a little while, you might be familiar with the series we did on the Wii covering rail shooters you should try for the console. And so far there's 3 episodes of those, so I'll put a link to those in the description or put the little video bumper thing at the end if I can figure it out again, so I haven't used that feature in a while. But we're going to switch gears a little bit and cover some PS1 games that fall into the same category of light gun shooters and rail shooters in general. We're not going to get to the Namco ones today, but we will get to those in the very near future, I assure you. So yeah, let's get into it and talk about 4 PS1 rail shooters you should check out. First, this one's probably familiar for a lot of people, Maximum Force. Developed by Mesa Logic and published by Atari Games in 1997. The rail shooter where you play as an unnamed silent protagonist blasting every terrorist you see in your path, battling through 3 zones of relentless gunfights and innocent passersby which you need to avoid in order to keep your health stocks up to complete your mission in counter-terrorism. Riveting, right? This was also a relatively high-profile rail shooter at the time, considering it was featuring digitized characters and like a lot of actually, for the time, like pretty solid jibbing effects for the late 90s. The home version allowed for a maximum of 7 lives per continue in the game, which isn't particularly difficult to say. So I mean, this game isn't as hard as Area 51, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But also, considering other entries on this list, Maximum Force for the PS1 is also a pretty solid game to have, and also it's still a relatively cheap one too. Like also that and Area 51 both like aren't terribly expensive. And also they're fairly common, so if you want to track down a copy and check it out for yourself, you totally can. You can either use the Konami Justifier for both of these, or you could use, I think even like some of the off-brand light guns work. And worst comes to worst, you can always use a controller. And also in 1998, this will receive a arcade re-release as a dual cab along with Area 51. The light game containing both games in one little solid unit, so that actually was a fairly cool thing when that happened. And also, speaking of Area 51, we're going to get into that one next. Area 51 was also developed by Mesa Logic and published by Atari Games in 1995, receiving a home port in 1996 for the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. The plot centers around the main protagonist, Yu, as Peterson taking part in an STAAR mission to prevent the alien race known as the Kron and other alien and zombie-like creatures from taking over Area 51's military facility. The game has several set pieces going through the sections of the facility and its warehouses and the tunnel system. Stephanie Grant is your partner alongside you, offering support during your mission, and you'll need all the help you can get. You have several different weapons you can choose from, like shotguns, assault rifles, and even grenades that work as a screen clear. Though its sections and difficulties ramp up quickly, and with the PS1 controller it's pretty accurate, but it's recommended if you have the PS1 mouse or the Justifier peripheral. I would highly recommend using those, because it can kind of more or less be your insurance policy to get to those shots quicker, if you know what I mean. And this one would also have a follow-up in 1998, which would be Area 51 Site 4, which actually ditches the digitized graphics for actually polygon and more like 3D render base, which is actually a fairly interesting sequel if you can actually see that one out in the wild. It's a pretty neat one. In 1998 would also be a dual cab with Maximum Force featured as a side part to it as well. And also Area 51 in 2005 would actually get a soft reboot for the PS2 and Xbox original that actually had David Duchovny as the main character of X-Files fame. And alongside the Area 51 reboot, they would also receive a sequel later on for the PS3 and Xbox 360, being Area 51 Black Site. And also, funny little extra tidbit about the Area 51 cabinets in particular. Rumor has it that they were actually used as training units for the most recent Area 51 raid that was memed to death just earlier this year. But coincidence? Maybe. But the truth is out there. And next up we have Judge Dredd, developed by Gremlin Interactive and published by Acclaim Entertainment in 1997 for the PS1 and Activision for the arcade market in 1997 as well. This is an interesting case considering it's a rail shooter with fairly decent control, but it's marred by some intense slowdown and sometimes complete stops on the PS1 at times. And it's a shame too, since it's only during the gameplay segments, because this game also features a fair amount of full motion video that's more akin to the 2010 Dredd movies with Carl Urban, as opposed to the more campy 94 like Stallone release that came out about 3 years prior to this game. And even with the technical issues, this is still a pretty alright game to play, all things granted. And so long as it doesn't freeze on you, because unfortunately during this session it froze at the literal halfway point of the game. As long as it doesn't freeze up on you entirely, like it might just be a scratched copy, because I tried this on all the PlayStations I have, like the 1, 2, and the 3, and it had the same result on all of them. So hopefully it's just a technical issue, hopefully it's just a scratch that can be buffed out, but we'll see. Also, this game too is relatively cheap considering when it was released. It tanked just because it got review bombed so badly, which if it was having errors like this, I can understand. But even though the issues like were present back then at launch, which I could totally understand it getting review bombed, but in spite of all that, like if you like Judge Dredd and are looking for kind of an oddball PS1 shoot 'em up game, or strap on the lawgiver and hit the streets, give this one a try. Last and certainly not least, let's take a look at Crypt Killer, also known as Henry Explorers. This is a Konami developed and published rail shooter from 1995 in the arcades, and receiving a home port in 1997 for the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn. The game scenery and characters are rendered as 3D models, while the enemies and projectiles are rendered as 2D sprites, so it's a 2.5D rail shooter if you want to look at it that way. In this, you play as a crypt raider guided by Galazon, the Spirit of Travel, who is the floating disembodied head you'll see between sections of the game, as you search for the Eyes of Guidance throughout your pick of the game's 6 stages, all with branching paths, to eventually open up the doors of fate. You have a base shotgun and an array of several other weapons to decimate mummies, skeletons, mermen, gargoyles, and a plethora of other mostly recognizable characters, a lot of things in the Hammer universe. This can be played either solo or with a second player, much like all the games mentioned in this video before, and unlike the other entries, this also has several endings depending on the path that you take and if you finish all 6 levels through the game. I ended up actually getting the bad ending for this run, because I only finished the first 2 stages, even though technically after those you're done. But this game definitely encourages the constant play and also going through the entire 6 stages in order to receive the good ending, or one of possibly 6 to 7 endings. It's actually kind of interesting. This one is probably going to be the more expensive of the lot, but not by much. Like this one was like $10 compared to the rest being $5, so not much of a difference. This one was complete, was about $12, so honestly, considering it's about $5 to $14, considering all these games you can get them for that much, it's not too bad. Honestly, these are all fairly cheap, so if you find them out in the wild, like, you really shouldn't pay more than $20 for all of it, at least at the time of this recording, but that really hasn't changed in a long time. Again, these are all like fully functional light gun games for the home, and they're all pretty much priced to move, and they're all really fun additions to have, so hopefully you found all this info helpful. And if you want to check out any of these, like, you can find them easily on the PS1, and also most of these games also have Sega Saturn ports as well, so you can take your pick. They're both pretty much the same with just minor differences. But thanks again for watching the video if you stuck through it this long, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.